We're going to get an update from Bravo, and then we're going to get a 21 CP police culture report. Mr. Manager, I'll quickly ask you if you have a couple of things you want to say.
Not for this first presentation, because Sally has it pretty well handled. We really appreciate the partnership we have with Bravo, which receives some of our hotel motel taxes throughout the year. So I know they do fabulous work over there, so we'll let her present this time. Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and share a little bit about the work that, frankly, you make possible for Bravo. We would not be able to do it without contributions from the City of Des Moines, and we're truly grateful for your partnership. I do especially want to thank Mayor-elect Bozen for serving as the representative to the Bravo board. And I want to give a high-level overview. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. If you have questions or want to know more, it is always a stretch for me to get it down to 15 slides. So if there's more detail I can provide, please don't hesitate to let me know. Should I just click it forward on the, okay, great. Great. Always like to start with just a quick refresher. At the most basic level, Bravo serves as the region's arts council. This means that our role is to align arts, culture, and heritage with everything else we're trying to do in the community, from education to mental health, economic development to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Bravo is leveraging community resources to maximize the impact of arts, culture, and heritage. We were founded in 2004. We're actually going to celebrate our 20th anniversary next year, which is very exciting. When visionary business and community leaders came together to recognize that quality of life would be a major differentiator for the region. They also understood that without a dedicated revenue stream, it would not be possible to sustain a robust cultural landscape. Hotel motel tax was identified as the most viable funding source. We now have 17 communities investing a portion of those taxes in Bravo, and it still makes up 99.5% of our revenue. We do very little additional fundraising. We rely almost solely on these public funds. Bravo is actually one of hundreds of local arts agencies or regional arts councils around the country, but I don't know of a single other one that has the same model that we do. We are truly the envy of many of my peers, and I'm very grateful for the work that we get to do. It's one of the earliest examples of public-private partnership, and I think is a successful story to tell. We are certainly best known for our grant making. That's really about all we did for the first 15 years. 2006 was our first grant year. We were actually supporting about 33 organizations at that time. We're going to announce grants in 2 weeks, and we will be supporting more than 90 nonprofit arts, culture, and heritage organizations in the region. Some of these organizations you're probably very familiar with: a nationally recognized symphony, an internationally acclaimed art center, a zoo that serves more than 500,000 visitors a year, a 110,000 square foot science center, and a 14-acre botanical garden. While these are all really incredible amenities, they're really only the tip of the iceberg for what we have in our community. We're also supporting a lot of organizations you might not expect or be aware of that are actually raising the bar in our community. The Des Moines African Youth Festival Awards brings together African youth from around the United States and the world to share their passion for fashion and music. The after-school arts program does quality after-school arts engagement in that often unsupervised time after the school day. The Des Moines Young Artists Theater is almost entirely youth-led productions that introduce students and their families to the transformative power of live theater. City Voices provides free voice lessons to students who may not have the resources to study privately. The Iowa Architectural Foundation, seasonal walking tours and programming to make sure that people understand and respect how architecture shapes our community. Art Force Iowa, working almost exclusively with young people who are underserved and marginalized to encourage them to find their voice. I could do an hour on each of these programs and all of the other ones that we're doing. The point is to say the landscape is rich and deep. Next week, as I said, we're going to be presenting a slate of Grant Cycle 24 operating grant awards to the Bravo board. You are getting a preview of what that looks like, assuming all of this is approved as presented. We did get 87 eligible applications. 53 of them were from organizations that are headquartered in the city of Des Moines. Now, that doesn't mean that's where they're doing the majority of their programming. It means that's where they're headquartered, but a lot of that is happening here. There's actually been growth regionally as well. We only have 2 communities at this point that do not have organizations that are paying into Bravo, that do not have organizations applying for funds. We're proud of that growth. And assuming the final slate is approved as what is recommended, these 53 Des Moines-based organizations will be receiving about 80% of the total funding allocated. It'll end up being about $3.7 million. For reference, Bravo received a little under $2 million from the city of Des Moines this past year, so it's about a 2-to-1 return on investment in these specific grants alone. Part of the reason the ROI is so high is because of thoughtful fiscal management on the part of the Bravo board. You can see post-pandemic that revenues are strong, and Bravo continues to invest more in our cultural partners and communities. Operating grants are still by far our largest investment, and we are proud to be able to invest quite a lot of funds. It'll be about $4.5 million this year in those grants. And for the first time ever, Bravo is going to be able to make those funds based on cash in hand as opposed to projected revenues coming in. That's a really exciting transition that will further strengthen the cultural sector. Just to break down that grant portfolio a little bit more, for GC24, those 87 organizations will all be receiving funds, but they're not all the same. There's a wide range based on annual operating budgets. This is one of the things that sometimes there's a misperception about who Bravo is funding and where the dollars are going. Only 13% of the organizations we support have budgets over $2 million. 54% of the organizations we support have budgets below $50,000, which we would consider tiny to small. This does not include the new applicants we received this year, most of which would also fall into this range. We continue to watch our sector and try and pay attention to the landscape. We also this year for the first time asked applicants to self-identify whether they were arts, culture, heritage, or interpretive science. What you're seeing here, again, self-reported. I do think we have an opportunity to educate some of our organizations on these definitions, but the fact that we have definitions and ask them to self-identify is progress in and of itself, as we want to make sure we understand the landscape we're supporting. Despite the success of Bravo's investing, we do still have some gaps in the landscape that we try to keep top of mind. As you're all aware, the pandemic hit cultural organizations really hard. With virtually zero revenue coming in for nearly a year, many had to go deep into their savings and cash reserves. Based on 2022 data, we know that nearly 60% of the organizations Bravo supports have less than 6 months of working capital. This is actually up from 47% of organizations reporting that they had less than 6 months of working capital last year. So we're not headed the right direction. It's obviously a serious vulnerability for the sector as audience patterns continue to fluctuate. Only 21% of the organizations Bravo supports self-report that they are rooted in or primarily serving communities of color. We think that arts, culture, and heritage should be consistently defined to certainly include the traditions and expressions of the many cultural groups across central Iowa, and we think we need to continue identifying what the barriers to engagement might be and how we can support that so that our entire community sees themselves in what's being presented. Finally, 57% of our nonprofit organizations are entirely volunteer-led. That is both a great strength and a potential vulnerability for our nonprofit sector. It's as volunteer numbers continue to change post-pandemic, this is actually 4,000 fewer volunteers reported by these organizations this year than last year. So again, the trajectory is something we need to keep an eye on and make sure that we're paying attention to. Beyond grant-making, Bravo also contributes to the region by providing leadership on arts and culture issues and opportunities. There are certain efforts and initiatives that a single grant to a single organization can't achieve. So Bravo leads or invests in projects and programs that will further align arts and culture with regional priorities. A couple examples of that are we invested in a creative coaches program with Billy Weathers and the Be Well Foundation to do after-school programming for middle school students. We have heard consistently that this is a gap for our community. There's just not a lot of productive arts and culture activity for after-school programming, so we worked with him on that. We funded some instruments in the community courtyard at Urban Dreams. Music is part of everyone's culture, and we invested in this creative space for community gathering that allows self-expression and engagement. Sometimes our investments are to work with in issues that are not maybe as visible. Other people are working on or leading, but it may not be as visible, and arts and culture can create that line of sight. The Dream Cube was a project we worked with Mid-Iowa Health Foundation to bring some visibility to the youth homelessness challenge and successes that our community has had. And then hopefully you all have seen the DART art shelters that we've invested in, making sure that there's an opportunity for public art moments of creative connection across the community. Whether through our grants or our investments in the community impact work, everything Bravo does is rooted in the intrinsic value of the arts, the creativity, the inspiration, the value that it brings. But as public investors, it's also pretty important for you to know that there is a clear, substantial economic impact as well. We actually just announced new economic impact data last week. You guys are just hitting the sweet spot of all of Bravo's good information. And based on 2022 data, the cultural sector, the nonprofit cultural sector in Greater Des Moines is generating more than $309.9 million worth of economic impact, supporting nearly 5,500 jobs, and the one I like at the bottom, returning nearly $66.8 million in total tax revenue back to the region and state and federal as well. Just to put that into context locally, the year that these data were collected, Bravo invested again about $4.5 million into the sector. They were then able to turn that into $309 million worth of economic impact, which is an ROI of about 70 to 1. I don't know a lot of the other investments that public entities are making that are generating that kind of return, but we're quite proud of this number. I think it's also important because it challenges the narrative that arts and culture are just on the take, that they're not adding value beyond the intrinsic or quality of life. This is a business sector for our community, and it's pretty important that we pay attention to all of the layers. The study also looked at local versus non-local visitors. You can see the statistics up here. I'm happy to dig deeper, but again, there is a clear evidence that people are traveling to our community, and this funding is driving tourism, which is feeding that hotel motel tax cycle, and that if we did not have these arts and culture amenities here, people would go find them someplace else. So we could do it here, or we could let them go to Kansas City or Omaha or Chicago. Seems like it makes good sense to continue supporting and doing it here. For the first time ever, this particular study that we participated in, which was a national study, also addressed social impact of the arts, wanting to make sure that we don't lose sight either of the economic benefit or the social impact. Both stories have to be told. These are sometimes a little bit harder to measure, but you can see we're well into the upper 80% on these stories. It's incredibly important that we maintain these beyond the economic impact because it matters to future generations. It matters to the people that are attending. Most of what Bravo does is by investing in others, but I do have to call out one program that we offer. It's called Passport to Culture. It was started in 2008 after we were approached to support the gap between students being able to access arts and culture programming field trips. They didn't have the money for the field trips for the admissions, and they didn't have the money for the buses. So Bravo, the Community Foundation, and the Principal Charity Classic came together to create a program that was then called Connecting Kids and Culture. We ran that program for several years, had to sunset it through the pandemic, have brought it back post-pandemic because the response from the community was, you must bring this program back. Otherwise, these students will not have these opportunities. This year, we're budgeted to invest about $195,000 in this program. Last year, 22,000 students were able to take field trips because of this experience and because of these funds, rather. And 50% of them said they would not have been able to have those experiences without these dollars. So this is a critically important program that we're running. And we're really looking forward to potential expansion this year to add more middle school programming and potentially looking at after school and summer engagement opportunities through this model as well. Bravo doesn't do any of the programming. We're simply connecting the schools with the existing cultural partners to make sure that they're accessing the youth programs that are available. And you can see the impact of those beyond just a great experience for kids, a memorable experience. Students that have access to arts and culture have demonstrably better outcomes, both academically and socially, and we're happy to be able to make those connections. Just like any other industry, we're watching trends. We try to keep on what's happening in our sector and what's coming. A couple of things we're keeping our eyes on right now is sector growth. As I said, we've seen about 40 more organizations apply to Bravo or be eligible to apply to Bravo since before the pandemic. There are some aspects of that that are really terrific, but there are some that are challenging on that. Do we have the audiences? Do we have the financials? Can we sustain a cultural sector that large? Many of those organizations are a little bit niche. Can we make sure that we're creating a strong and robust landscape? Are there opportunities for shared services or collaboration? Another challenge that we're hearing regularly is space, that this is a rate limiting factor for many of the organizations. They're storing things in Ankeny, they're performing in Waukee, they're rehearsing in Altoona. It's not consistent. Audiences don't know where to find them. And it has been a challenge for the organizations. So we are currently working with a consultant on a space needs assessment. We asked every one of the organizations that we fund, what's working, what's missing, what are your gaps, what are your opportunities. I should get that report back. I'm just a little early on that one. I should get that report back tomorrow. We should have something to share with some recommendations by January. But this could be an opportunity as the landscape downtown is changing. Are there opportunities to better engage and connect arts and culture organizations with the space that's available? And then finally, metrics. This is always a challenge. I'm delighted to have the economic impact data, some of the numbers that I was able to share with you from the grant cycle, but there are some challenges to the cultural sector to continue to demonstrate that we are essential. There are a lot of choices to be made and always more opportunities than dollars available. We want to make sure that we're continuing to tell the story about the impact that these dollars have on our community so that we can continue to leverage investments not only from our public partners, but also to ensure continued corporate individual philanthropy support for the sector beyond what Bravo is able to provide. So there's a lot of numbers and a lot of data, and as we conclude, if there's nothing else that you remember from this, please remember, first of all, how grateful we are for the investment from the City of Des Moines. We truly could not do what we do. And please remember that arts and culture are part of everything. There's nothing you can come up with that you're working on or that's important to this community that the cultural sector can't help make better. And if you're not sure, just give me a call. I'll be happy to make those connections for you. I want to thank Connie Bozen again for serving as the City of Des Moines representative on the Bravo board. She represents you well, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Anybody?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. Sally, how big is your staff?
We are me plus 4 right now.
So 5 people,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And have you ever run the numbers of what % of your income is used for staffing? I would be interested
Yes.
to know. So.
I can run it a lot of different ways, as you're well aware. I could tell you how much goes for administration and overhead, but you have to understand how those numbers are calculated. So I'm happy to share. Scott's got the budget. We send it every year. I'm happy to send it out, and you can take a look.
So the program that you're doing with the middle school and the field trips and
Yeah.
such. So run that by me again. Are you actually staffing and organizing that, or that's another program that you're funding?
It's basically a service that we provide, Carl. We have one staff member who's probably maybe 20% time on administration of that program. The beauty of it is that it really does kind of run itself. We make the connections, again, between the school districts and the cultural partners, but we have a website. They do most of the work electronically. So it's not an administrative burden to run that program. But that's all we do, is we make the connections. We offer the school districts the amount of funding that's available to them, and then they're responsible for booking and scheduling, and then it's a reimbursement model.
And so
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm
Nope,
sorry.
you're fine. What?
Let's see. 5 people.
That number just got to 5.
And we're going back to 4.
Yeah, they
We
had
just-
3 for up until about a year ago.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. And do you have volunteers that help with it?
We don't.
Okay.
With the exception of our 37-member board of directors who are incredibly
sure.
supportive volunteers. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, anybody else have anything?
I just want to thank Sally and her team because they have just expanded because of the expansion and the work they're doing, especially with the work they're going to do with the dollars we gave for ARPA for Des Moines students, or for Des Moines youth primarily. So there was 750,000, and we were the only community that contributed to Bravo with our ARPA dollars. So very proud to say it. So hopefully it'll provide more kids the opportunity to go to those shows at the Civic Center or White Sherman or whatever they want to go to, Art Center.
Oh, Connie, would you say that another time, please?
We were the only community that gave dollars from ARPA to Bravo
Yeah.
because of the constraints they had during the pandemic. They truly did lose funding.
All right, Sally, thank you so much, and thanks to all the things that Bravo has done and your board, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
It's part of what makes us a great community.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time this morning.
Mr. Manager, let's move on to 21CP.
Okay. I know that Laura is getting our consultants online here, but as she does that, I have just a few introductory comments. One, I want to send appreciation to the consultants at 21CP for their work on this, but also I want to thank the community at large because there was an exhaustive amount of input that was given throughout this process. They'll talk about the different surveys and interviews and focus groups that were conducted, not only internally with the police department, but with other departments, and then with the community at large. And so given they had a wealth of information, it should be no surprise that the report itself has quite a few recommendations, I think 46 in fact, that address what they heard throughout those community conversations. So with that, reminder that this work was requested voluntarily, by the way. For those of you that may have done research on our consultants, they are often asked to come in when the federal government has come into a community and said their police department needs such a review. But for us, this was a voluntary exercise that I believe Mayor-elect Bozen had requested and the council agreed was a very good idea to acknowledge that, frankly, community policing across the country continues to evolve. And with that, best practices come to light and different opportunities to try new things. And so having 21CP with their knowledge across the country with their other clients was a perfect match for us to bring in and understand what improvements we could be making to our policies, but then also look into our training and the procedures that we have in tracking the training. It's one thing to have in writing what the policies are for a department or for an organization. It's another to make sure that you have 100% compliance with your staff and understanding what those policies are and are trained to those policies. And so we asked 21CP to look at that. And then lastly, the additional task for 21CP was to understand our culture within the department and making sure that there's an understanding within our officers that they need to actually follow the policies and that they've had that training and have signed off on that. So I'm glad to see that there's a wealth of information within this report. I've had a chance to talk with Chief about how we use this report as a roadmap to continuous improvement, which I know the department is dedicated to continuous improvement. And so hopefully that gets us started, and we'll hear from the consultants. Understand that this report will be made public this morning and available to the public as well. So we can always bring further questions back to the consultants as you want, because this is, again, a lengthy report. We will also have regular updates as to the progress and the implementation of the report. And we'll do that in coordination with the Public Works LLC that you already received status reports on.
Okay.
So is that quarterly?
Hold on.
I believe that is. Yes.
Okay, I'll try it.
So Mayor, if you want, I can take questions about process before we get started, but I'd ask that we leave the report content to the consultants as we get them logged in.
Anybody have any process questions? Yes. Anybody?
Yep, Mayor, this is Josh. I've got a quick question.
Okay.
So I was wondering if we can, I've got some initial questions, but I don't know that they'll be right for this meeting. Are we going to have an opportunity to maybe meet separately with the consultant team to discuss the report and follow-up questions if we want?
Mr. Manager?
We can make those arrangements.
Thank you.
For those that are listening in, we're having 3 of the consultants help with the presentation this morning, but just for your awareness, we had over 8 of the consultants from this company engage at one point in time throughout the process. So we got a lot of their attention and expertise from across the country, so it was very helpful to have that as well.
Mayor, they should all be on the phone now.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi, this is Catherine Olson.
Yes. And this is Roberto Diaz, and I believe we have Maurice Paulson on the phone as well.
Yes, Maurice Costa is here as well.
All right, good morning.
So, good morning, Mayor and Council. I'd just like to, I'll go ahead and start off. It's kind of awkward here a little bit. I'm watching the YouTube, and I think we're a few seconds behind, so I just shut the volume on that, and we're doing this all on the phone now, and I'm just looking at you on the computer screen. This is not how we usually present. My apologies for that. I did hear the one question about the opportunity to meet with us. The way this report came out and the time that it took and budget and so far, the last minute meeting here we were unable to make. So I appreciate this opportunity to do this introduction to you about the report, what happened, a little bit about our company, how we got there, and then answer some of the questions that you may have. If there's a need down the line, if you have some additional questions or something, maybe we can coordinate something through Mr. Sanders. But I'll give you a little bit of background on and allow each of us to introduce ourselves. Myself, I am a retired police officer. I spent 35 years with the Tucson Police Department. I did about every type of assignment you could do on the department. I was a bike officer. I was a commander of SWAT and hostage. I was a commander of internal affairs. Spent a lot of time in patrol in all different ranks. And I was 9 years as an assistant chief and commanded all 4 bureaus of the department prior to being appointed as the chief of police for the city of Tucson and served in that capacity from 2009 to the end of 2015. During that time, I was appointed to President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. This occurred after the Ferguson and Mike Brown incidents, as I'm sure you're well aware, and it developed a report that oftentimes has been called a blueprint for how policing should go forward into the 21st century. This report has been endorsed by both major city chiefs as well as IACP and Noble National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We, 3 of the members, when I say we, 3 of the members of that panel, Chuck Ramsey, myself, and John Smoot, formed 21 CP in 2016, January 2016. Commissioner Ramsey from Philadelphia and myself were both retiring at that time, and we felt there was a lot of work to be done, and so we formed this company, and we've done work across the country and are continuing to do work across the country in areas such as Baltimore, Cleveland, Seattle, a lot of universities, and we get brought in oftentimes when there's a crisis or an issue. And that's what is so unique about what Des Moines has done. We were brought in because of not any significant singular event that required some type of immediate, intervention or care. This was an agency in the city who was trying to make sure that you are in line with best practices that are out there across the country dealing with community policing, police culture, training, best practices of all nature. And so it was very refreshing coming with that open door policy. Say, okay, look at us. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? How do we improve? And that's how we kind of formulate it. Before we dive deep into the report, I'd like each of my colleagues to give you some of their background. I'll go to Catherine, who is the project manager for this, and let her introduce herself to you.
Thank you so much, Chaz. My name is Catherine Olson, and it's a pleasure working with the City of Des Moines on this project. We found everyone to be incredibly cooperative and collaborative. As far as my background goes, I spent nearly 20 years as an employment and civil rights lawyer, and then went inside the Seattle Police Department to oversee their internal investigations unit. So looking at complaints of police misconduct, and given the size of the Seattle Police Department, we saw just about every kind of complaint that could come in, from the least serious to officer-involved shootings. And so gained a lot of experience in policing issues, as I was also on the executive command staff there, and was pulled into other kinds of operational and administrative sorts of issues. Since leaving the Seattle Police Department, I've worked on a variety of consulting projects over the past 10 years, a lot of it focused on organizational health of police departments, but also looking at ways that we can help align a police department's mission with community expectations and the realities of budget, resources, and staffing challenges, and working towards the goal of fair and impartial policing at the same time. I've also been involved with the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, and co-authored a book on investigating police misconduct investigation. I'll turn it over to Maurice now. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. My name is Maurice Glasson. I'm also a consultant with 21CP. My background began as a criminal prosecutor in Seattle, Washington, where I served for almost a decade before moving to Chicago to join the John D. and Captain G. MacArthur Foundation for 5 years, where I spent most of my time researching and doing grant making around procedural justice, policing reform, as well as violence reduction across the country. Near the end of my time in the MacArthur Foundation, I was asked to join Mayor Emanuel's Police Accountability Task Force, reviewing the shooting of Laquan McDonald and the fallout that came from that, and the need to make changes in the Chicago Police Department. Following that task force, I was asked to join the police department, where I built a data analytics and monitoring auditing team that managed both the consent decree as well as their strategy, the crime strategy. And then I was asked to join the new mayor, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, as her chief of staff, where I had principal responsibility for oversight of the consent decree, as well as all manner of operations in the Chicago Police Department, where I served for about 2.5 years. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ted.
Thank you. So as you can see, we have some very distinct experts that take part in this, but also it's not just for large cities. A lot of our work has focused on mid-sized cities, and to be honest, a lot of our work has been gearing now towards universities. And universities are quite unique in that they have a very strong community policing input of that. So we do run the whole gamut. We have consultants that have worked in every size police department. So I don't want you to think that we're only concentrated on large departments. And Des Moines is a fairly good-sized department itself. I know you're the largest in the state. And what we saw when we arrived there was a department that is functioning fairly well. But like with any police department across the country that we've ever encountered or experienced, there's areas that can be improved. Now, part of our process in going forward is we have what we call the 3 Ps. We start with paper. We do a huge, massive request for documents, and it is a lot of work to provide everything that we look at and everything that we evaluate, policies, training curriculum, reports that deal with any type of staffing alignment or calls for service, things of that nature. And as we discussed in the report, there were some issues with that, with the ability of Des Moines to provide some of the information and documentation. And that has been pointed out already in a previous study that you've authorized from Public Works. and it came out with recommendations from there, which we highly encourage you to continue, and that was one of our recommendations. The next is we look at performance. We look at how are all of the policies being followed, how's the training being conducted. We attend some trainings, we evaluate the policies, we talk with individuals, which then leads us into our next part, which is people. And we talk with people inside the agency and outside the agency. Oftentimes we'll go and we'll look out for the greatest critics of the department, because you will hear issues there that, at some point need to be addressed and at some level. We don't go out and just try and talk with people who support the department. Obviously, that would be useless. We try to get a gamut of impressions from all across the spectrum to help us look at what are issues where a department is performing well, where are areas where the department can use some improvement. We then break that down into our areas, our recommendations. We try and give a background, as you will see in the report. It's a fairly large report, but that's because we like to give you your money's worth there. We look at the different things and we give you the reasoning for our recommendations. We have worked with the city on these recommendations and talked about some of the things where to make sure we hadn't missed anything that come forward. We also talked with some of the stakeholders, both negative and positive, about some of the issues that we felt were recommendations to make, to try to ensure that what we were providing was useful to the city and to the department. The department has been very open in dealing with us and working with us. They have not held back anything from us. And it was quite a pleasure being there. I will be honest, being a desert boy the first time we went there, it was a little bit cold for me, but I can't even imagine what it's like there right now. But it was a very good experience going there and working with the individuals that we met within your city. I don't know exactly how you want me to take this, and maybe I'll stop here and allow you to ask questions. You've had a little bit of time to look at the report. I'm sure you'll have more time and more questions later, but are there any points that we'd like to go into right now, Mr. Sanders?
Taz, this is Scott. I think it would be helpful to highlight the different recommendations that you see as priorities, and the categories that you chose to group those together.
Okay. I'm going to turn off the volume on my YouTube. That's confusing me. Hold on. Okay.
Taz, as you do that, recall that we've got the document that we can go to page numbers or recommendation numbers for you, for the audience.
Okay. All right. One of the things that I would really like to bring up, and it may not be the most important, but I think to me it's one of the most important. Go to page 17 on the document. And if you look at that, very top of 17, there's a chart there that shows authorized personnel over time. And this was something that came up quite often in our conversations. And in some ways, it was stated as an element of pride. Other ways, it was an element of frustration. Oftentimes, members and people say, well, that's just the Des Moines way. We make do. Which, in a way you could say, well, that's pretty awesome that you do your job with what you have, because you have no other recourse there. But a lot of people kept saying that no staffing increases had occurred since 1995. That seems pretty hard for us to believe. So we went back, we asked for some numbers here. And while these staffing numbers show that there has been an increase in department size, the predominance come in on civilian personnel. And while that oftentimes is a recommendation because you can provide some stability, in certain areas such as training, admin, communication records, so forth, by bringing in civilian personnel and not using officers for those type of functions, you still have to have the officers on the street to meet a growing workload. So while the population has gone up about 20,000 from 2000 to 2020, your sworn personnel has only gone up by 3. The calls for service, we didn't have the numbers for 2000, but you can see that there was at least 5,000 from 2016 to 2020, which is pretty much the traditional trend line that you see for calls for services. One of the things that we have determined in our travels across the country is when you want to get into community policing aspect, it is a resource-intensive endeavor. You want to have your officers to have the ability and the time to talk with people, to get out of patrol cars, to walk around, to meet the people in the residents in the neighborhoods, the businesses, and that takes staff because you also have to respond to the calls for service that are coming in. So to see that there has been such a static number of sworn personnel over the past 20 years shows, in my mind, that there probably is some attention needs to be paid towards adequately staffing the department with the sworn personnel they would need to perform the type of policing that Des Moines wants. I'm not saying it's going to be a huge increase, and I understand there are budgetary restraints. Every city has undergone that. And to be honest, every city is having problems recruiting good qualified candidates to be police officers across the country. So it's not just to say, okay, get more and it'll happen. But I think it's one of the areas that you need to pay attention to because if you want to implement the type of policing that we talk about, you are going to need the resources available to do that. The next area that I think we would really like to see, sorry, go ahead.
If I may, just since we jumped to this is an area that I had a couple of questions on. And so since you brought it up, I thought I'd ask. Because one of the things I was wondering about, and I was hoping maybe there'd be a little more context to understand this. Is there a ratio in terms of, in the report itself, you sort of mentioned that over time, since we're now at, I think, 574 people from a population perspective per sworn officer. Is there a ratio there? And how does our ratio of staffing and officers and civilians compare to other cities? And is that valuable to look at as well?
There's limited value to that because there are ratios, but they differ from community to community. It really is going to depend on what the community wants to see from their department. You go back east and you're going to see much higher ratios of officer to civilian, along the lines of maybe, 9 officers per 100,000, 10 officers per 100,000. You'll go out west and you'll see 1.7 officers per 1,000. And so the ratio, and I'm sorry, I said 100,000 at first, it's per 1,000. And the ratios differ from the areas that are being policed and from what the desires of the community are. Oftentimes, departments will do a staffing study, or so to say, okay, first off, what is our priority? Do we want to have them just respond to calls for service? Do we want faster response times? Do we want time out of the patrol car, working with the neighborhood, working with the businesses? What do we want to see our police department do? Based upon that, you come up with a number. In order to meet that, we feel the ratio should be such and such. We didn't delve into it in that capacity. We're just saying that your resources have not grown during that time, yet your numbers of citizens and as well as calls for service have. And you probably want to pay some attention to that, to look at where you need to put your resources at. Does that help a little bit? I can't give you it should be 2.4 officers per 1,000, because it's going to differ from area that's being policed and from what the community desires are.
Yes, that helps some. And I guess one of my related questions was, and maybe some of this is something to unpack further, but one of my related questions was how the interplay with civilians comes into that, right? And what you want people doing. And I don't know enough of the detail, but we've doubled the number of civilian staff in that time period. And
yes.
And I don't know if if we used to have, for example, sworn officers doing parking enforcement, and now we have that done entirely by civilians, and that's freed up sworn officers to focus on things we want. I mean, is that one of the ways that
yes,
we can?
That is one way that cities respond to those type of issues over the years, because they have realize, you gave it an excellent example in that oftentimes using a higher paid police officer to do something that can be done by civilian personnel and done just as well frees up the officer for other reasons. However, there's limits to how much that can do to increase your sworn officer staffing. There's limited jobs that can report to that, where we see a lot of increase in growth in civilian ranks is in the areas of communications, record keeping, staff work, and analysis. I'm not saying those are not important positions. They are. But when you get down to what is your response to community issues from sworn police officers look like, that's what you need to determine what your community wants and then make your staffing numbers based upon that. But one of the ways a lot of departments have kind of countered the decrease in city budgets and state budgets is by trying to civilianize certain positions that have been traditionally held by sworn police officers, and then allowing those officers to be freed up to go out and do police work.
And is there a comprehensive list of, I assume you have recommendations in terms of what types of positions can be sort of civilianized, I guess, as you said. Is there a list of those that are appropriate for that? I mean, clearly if you want officers out engaging with the community, like our neighborhood-based service delivery, like you need officers for that. If you want visibility and officers on foot patrol, that like you need those pieces. But what are additional examples of the things that are appropriate for that civilian role?
I'm not sure if we developed a list per se like that. Catherine, do you have anything on that?
Taz, this is Scott. I might also direct you to recommendation 26 that you've given on page 50 that talks about the strategic plan. And in some of those parts of that recommendation and the ones that follow, I think get to the heart of what Councilman Mandelbaum is asking about, that we need to spend that time to put that strategy together and understand the community preferences that would lead to headcount requirements.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Scott. And this is Catherine. I would add that, I mean, the work that we were asked to do wasn't just focused on doing a full staffing analysis, which, can be done, but wasn't done here in terms of a deep dive on that issue of sworn versus civilian functions. There's clearly been some movement even over, recently since the protests of 2020 and the community and representatives' interest in having alternative responses to mental health crisis related sorts of calls. And the department has done a great job of pulling in some mental health experts and professionals from the community to help with that function. And again, those are going to be civilians, sometimes responding with officers, other times not. And so that's an example of an area where looking at ways to bring in civilians to do work that more traditionally was assigned to sworn officers is already occurring.
And just so I understand, are the civilians in our care team and in mobile crisis, are they accounted for in that civilian number right now? I guess actually the chart goes back to 2020, so the care program probably would not be in there. But if we look at the chart for 2023, would they be reflected there? Because I thought they were Broadlawn's employees.
I can
That's
answer
my
that.
understanding.
Yeah, in our situation, it's only the police officers that are part of that team that count as our personnel. And then we contract with Broadlawns. Those are their employees.
So they're not in the civilian number.
They're not counted in our civilian count.
Joe?
Can I just, are we at our authorized strength? Are we where we need to be is what this report states what our authorized strength is, and then actually, where are we if we're not there?
So that's a question you could ask every day and have a different answer, frankly.
How about today?
I don't know that we
We're not
even
at
track
strength,
it
they
every
seldom
day,
know.
but I know we're within striking distance that as we start recruiting right now for another academy, the numbers we're aiming for will be to full authorized strength plus a few more at the beginning of the academy. So we are within striking distance is the way I
So
would.
that takes into account. And so what's our last data that we have of service calls? I mean, you go back 2016, is that the last one we got? How they've increased 4 years, 5,000, because
I know it's continued to
I think the
increase.
fire calls have increased and medic calls probably more than that over that amount of time. I'm surprised that the police isn't included in that also, because I think they respond to a lot of those calls also, don't they?
Oftentimes there's a dual
Especially,
response
yeah,
between police
mental
and fire, and the trend that you see from 2016 to 2020 has continued.
So that has continued up. But
Yes.
But then we have less authorized strength in 2020 than we did in 2016. Is that correct? And our calls have gone up?
Pretty close to that, yes.
I guess I don't understand why that doesn't, to a layperson that has, just using a little common sense here, if our calls are going up, why aren't we creating more manpower to give a better service to our residents?
Sure. So that there's,
If I
go ahead, Taz.
if I was going to jump in on that, and that's kind of what the discussion is here, that I think that Des Moines has tried to deal with this and address these issues in some of the ways that have already been discussed here by looking at what positions could be civilianized in order to allow some sworn staffing to be reapplied to police-related type calls. Looking at response models, the joint response model for mental health issues, which every department across the country has been dealing with, things of that nature, and how to try and deal with this issue of rising call load yet static staffing on sworn. But there comes a point where you just can't do it by readjusting response models. And I think that a lot of agencies have surpassed that point, and I wouldn't be surprised if Des Moines is not one of them, because that was something that came up by staffing within the department themselves. Quite often, officers saying that they need to have more officers out in the field. They need to be able to do some of the work that's been required of them. So, I looked at the recommendations you sent me to on page 50 there, and that's talking about community policing and community engagement strategies. And that's part of it, but that's really not the staffing model per se. That's just how you respond to some of these issues, which Des Moines has done. But I think that the gentleman who's talking right now, I think, is hitting the point, saying staffing has not gone up yet. Calls for service have. What have we done? Some of the reassignment of personnel is one of the answers. But I think you also start looking at maybe a staffing study to say exactly what should our number be to provide. And well, first you have to decide, what do you want your police service to be like? Police across the country have taken on things that really are not crime related. They're community health related because no one else has been there 24/7 to deal with these issues. And that has been a drag on police services across the country and prevented them from dealing with the crime-related issues. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but people need to understand that is going on, and that affects the ability of a police department to respond to all of the issues that people want them to respond to. So that's something that the community needs to reevaluate and assess and say, this is how we want to do it. In order to do that, this is what our staffing numbers should be. And that was not the depth of the report that we went into on this occurrence.
But actually, the civilian personnel is down also from the chart.
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing. I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry.
Last
So, and real quick, so our civilian personnel has gone down also. And I know we don't have current numbers as of 2023, but just over from 2016 to 2020, I mean, we have more calls and less people. That just doesn't make much sense. And I guess going through a strategic plan with our community, and I mean, I think, yeah, I think that that's kind of been done already. As all of us sit up here after I would say our last election, and supporting public safety and supporting the things that we've done, that, I mean, we have a clear picture of what our residents want. They want to feel safe in our city, and they want to make sure their response times are what they need to be. And I'm hoping that, I don't know if this, I mean, this makes no sense. I mean, we've got more calls and less people. Sorry.
I just wanted to go back to, on the report, you talked about the mental health, the whole area of mental health. Taking on police and fire, actually, have been taking on a lot of the social issues. So in your recommendation, I believe it would probably be to expand that program, or to get more, to take some of the social calls away. I know that we've started it, and would it be a part of the recommendation, because there was quite a few recommended items, and there was a community safety plan too, and some of those things. So if you could expand upon that.
Maurice, was that your area there, or Catherine? Who was that?
That was actually Catherine.
Okay.
Yes, and yes, as we tried to, I was saying before, the department and the city as a whole has really worked on bringing in care and alternative models of response, and it's a varied model. It's involving different responses depending on the situation, and our initial sense was the city's done a great job in moving in that direction. There are several recommendations related to trying to make sure, again, back to the data and data gathering and analysis issue that Taz talked about up front, making sure that the department has the resources it needs to gather data to really assess that program and which of the different models of response are being used and how they're being used and who's involved. It's a resource issue always, whether that's bringing in someone to do that data analysis, or our recommendations also include just bringing in more resources to that particular program. It is, time limited on certain days, and that's where a good, robust data analysis comes in to determine whether when staffing is available is the time that it's most needed, or whether it needs to be expanded. We also were very impressed with the neighborhood and the policing plan and the Skywalk plan. That's another area where more resources could be used. It is very much tied into the alternative response model, and we thought that was an area where additional officers and or civilians being involved on that front is, again, these are just examples of our recommendations, would be helpful.
The other thing is
that, if I could add on to that. Oh, I'm sorry, Jess, go ahead.
I just wanted, well, go ahead, because I was going to ask about the whole data, because there's a lot of information about data. But go ahead and finish what you're saying.
What I was going to offer, and that Des Moines is the same place a lot of departments are, and that, over the past 10, 15 years or so, we've been trying to deal with how do we provide the services that police have somehow absorbed, and a lot of them deal with mental health issues, as was pointed out by one of you. And oftentimes there are singular units that are developed that work in conjunction with community groups or mental health groups to provide these type of services. And it's a great co-response delivery model. The problem is that it has become such a pervasive issue for law enforcement across the country. If you go back up again, back to page 50, where we talked about the neighborhood-based service delivery unit, that's trying to deal with some of the issues in the community and dealing with the neighborhood-based problems that are there. And it's the same idea as what's going on with mental health, in that somehow we have kind of pigeonholed community policing into specialized units, where that is a necessity because of staffing usually. Because you need to have cops available to respond to 911 calls. You need to have cops out there patrolling and making sure the community is safe, working the problem areas. However, you're getting a lot of issues saying, people say, I want help with this issue going on in my neighborhood, in my business community. So oftentimes departments have developed singular units that deal with that. The problem is that can bleed over into then the feeling of, well, that's not our problem, that's the NBSD unit that deals with that. What we would promulgate, and for departments across the country, we have done this repeatedly, is to really keep instilling the issue of problem-oriented type policing, using, often I'm sure all of you have heard of the SARA model, where we teach officers the SARA model to go in and look at issues that are occurring in the community and thinking with alternative problem solving, how do we deal with that? Bringing in maybe public works, bringing in, transportation, waste management, dealing with issues that are affecting the community that may not be seen as crime per se, but they're the quality of life issues that police get called in for. And that philosophy needs to be infiltrated throughout the department, not just isolated in one unit, NBSD, who are doing a fantastic job. Everyone said this unit needs to be expanded. We agree to the point this philosophy needs to be expanded, but I don't know if you can keep expanding one unit to deal just with community problems. You want to get all of your officers thinking along the lines of how do we deal with community problems. I know we've worked with some jurisdictions where they make that part of the training curriculum, teaching young officers in their first year of probationary to go out and identify a problem in the beat that they're working and figure out ways to deal with that problem. And they have to do that as part of their training curriculum. It tries to instill that mindset of dealing with it. Once you start dealing with these outside issues, that will hopefully help free up some officers because they're no longer dealing with the symptoms those problems resulted. And I'm sorry, someone had a question about data. I don't know if we can answer, but we can take a crack at it.
Because a lot of information was about all the data, and I believe we've got staff now to do that. That's why I just wanted to make sure people knew that.
Yes, we've started that process with three hires.
So we'll be able to tell which one.
And actually, that's one of our other focus areas where I would, talk about what are one of the greater needs, and it's to improve your documentation and your data gathering methods. That was also recommended through the Public Works document. I know that work has started on that. We would encourage that to continue to devise a way to answer some of those questions that come up from the community about what are you doing here on these stops? What are you doing with these type of encounters with the community? How are they being tracked? And then giving data that can be analyzed to show you, are there issues that need to be addressed? Are there issues that are really not what are being portrayed? So we highly encourage to improve your documentation and data gathering capabilities. And that's included in several of the recommendations.
And I know there's things on here that involve dashboard and our website and things like that. Who are we doing that, or are we subbing it out to somebody maybe will do it separately for public safety, or how are we doing that all internally?
Yes.
So
yes.
all of these things will be posted by our.
We need to get to the point where we have the staff that are posting this information in real time.
Okay.
For the dashboard and for the public to be able to see. And that's where the 3 hires have started us out down that path. But there's going to need to be even more resources put towards that, which was consistent with the Public Works.
Right.
So we'll see a dashboard where there's mental health calls separate from, a police officer didn't have to respond to this. And so we'll get a better idea of where all that's at and how many times.
Eventually, yes.
So eventually, yes. Like within 12 months, or we'll have.
There will be data in 12 months. I hope that it'll be that refined, but it may not be. We're going to be aggressive in that regard, but it will take a lot of resources to get this up and running.
More than the 3 that we hired?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So in the report, it had frustration of the officers on the data they were entering. So is that being worked out? I think I read somewhere that their ability to enter the data is a process that takes, it's cumbersome, it sounded like.
Sure.
So
And at
that's-
times repetitive in two different systems. So we're trying to, making sure that the solution is efficient with one entry.
Okay.
Well, it's frustrating that you say that we're going to hire more people to do data entry, but we're not going to hire more people to keep our residents safe and people out on the street.
Well,
So,
I
I
would-
mean, I don't know.
Less data to keep track of.
yeah, no. No, there will be let me be clear. The intent is to have a combination. But understand that the other community concerns that we are all dealing with, all of us, in things like homelessness, in youth gun violence. These are other initiatives that we are pouring a lot of resources into at the moment, and have been for the past several years. But it continues to accelerate in those areas. And where we are successful in those areas will take burden off of our police department. And so there is a preventative aspect that we're trying to address. And we have great partners out in the community helping us with those efforts. And you're putting resources into those as well. But you're right, there needs to be a combination. We have seen the success of the officers downtown on foot. We know that our neighborhoods would like to see similar treatment. So we see the success there and recognize that, and as Taz has mentioned, we are at that breaking point of we've squeezed efficiency with civilians within the department that we do need additional sworn officers. But we also want to be smart about where we have those officers engage with the public. So that's why you see quite a few recommendations dealing with a strategic plan and finishing the CLIA process.
Well,
What they refer to.
and can I ask, because it seemed to me that one of the overarching themes in terms of data that right now we're not using data to inform what we need to do or where we need to focus. And there could be good data in there in terms of what types of crime, what types of things our community is experiencing. And we should be responding to that data, but we need to do some of the analysis to know, okay, we need to staff X division in this way because we're seeing more crimes that way. At least that's the way I read it. I don't know.
Yes.
There is a way that data can help us be more efficient and
Absolutely.
direct resources where they're needed. And that's a piece that's missing too. Like we want to spend any dollars as effectively as we can, and the data helps us do that. And in the absence of that, we can be spending dollars, but not necessarily as effectively.
Yeah, and let me be
If I
clear.
could address that.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Taz.
No, and that you're exactly right in some regards there, in that data is extremely useful in helping you decide the deployment of your resources and if necessary. And Des Moines I'm not saying Des Moines is not doing anything. They're doing what departments traditionally have done, looking at, the calls for service, the beat alignment, and so forth. However, if I remember correctly, aren't we going through a new CAD or RMS system that the data capabilities are being improved? And I think that is something you need to continue to do, because police departments across the country in the last 10, 15 years have been shown and realized that across the board, data capability is not where it should be. There needs to be more information that's taken, because of the ability to do better analysis on data helps you were just saying, helps you drive the department resources where they need to go. We think Des Moines is on that path, but they're not there yet. And they need to continue that work. They need to implement the suggestions from the Public Works document. They need to look at internally how they're using that data in a staffing plan. And you're exactly right. That will help deploy where do we need to put our resources at based upon the call load, the types of calls, the desires for the community, what they're having. In order to reach those decisions, you need to improve your data capabilities.
Carl?
Yes. So Scott, could you remind us, so have the 3 civilian data analysts been hired or about to be hired? And I thought there was supposed to be a supervisor of that also.
Yes, so the supervisor's already in place and working on it and helping to hire the next 2, which are in final interviews. I think we're talking weeks, and we'll have them on board as well.
Okay. And that group, remind me, are they part of IT or part of
Yes.
the police department?
Yes, they are a part of IT, and but understand that we will have a separate public safety IT focus in the near future.
Okay.
We're working towards that as well.
Not unlike in the city attorney's office, there are
litigation and other divisions.
attorneys that are assigned to the police department, or that's what their major work is.
Well, that's different.
One attorney.
Yeah.
Major one attorney.
Okay.
They're not attorneys.
One.
One.
Thank you, Jeff, for clarifying.
She's not busy at all, is she, Jeff?
Thanks.
Scott? Anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to make clear that, and I think Taz has brought this up as well, that we are using data and have been. It's just there is a new level of expectation from the community to have better and more nimble data, and we understand that, and we agree with that. And so that's where the push is, to get more real-time information out to the public, and most importantly, to the management of the resources. So that's council, that's me, and that's the police managers. So we need to have much, much more real-time information. And again, meld in what are non-traditional police services into that. So where do we need to have police involved in collaborating, or where is there an opportunity to not have them present? Because we're learning as we go about, just the presence of police is sometimes the wrong approach for a mental health issue or others. So we have to be willing to try new processes and new partnerships, and you're doing that. But we're only a couple years into a couple of those relationships, so we need to continue pressing that.
Good stuff. Anything else on the presentation, Scott?
There's one more area I'd like to address, if that's okay.
Okay.
You have to identify some of the priorities. And here's one where I really feel Chief Wingrid's pain. No matter how hard a chief tries to communicate internally within their organization, there are always going to be those who say there's not enough communication. Excuse me, internally or externally. And I know that from living through it myself. I would put out weekly videos. I would put out memos of information. And then I'd go to a briefing and people would ask exactly about the stuff that was put out in the video and the memo. Well, why haven't you talked about this? And, you get very frustrated as a leader or of an organization saying, I just put that out 2 days ago. Why haven't you read it? And the fact is, the department of this size is so rapidly moving. So many things are going on. So many things are happening. You have to go over and above in your communication styles internally. That also applies externally. You have an excellent PIO there who is just loved by the department and the community. But you can't rely just on that one individual. And you have to put out the information constantly, externally to the community, as well as internally to your staff. We talk about the implementation of a dashboard, which is a way that the community can come in and find out what's going on. We highly recommend that our recommendations and the progress on our recommendations be put on that dashboard. Things that the department can show the community, this is what we're doing, this is how we're working on the issues that have been said to be are important to us, and this is where you can find out about what we're doing. And you just can never go overboard on communication, both internally and externally, and that's one of the areas that we also commented some of our recommendations on.
Yes, thank you. I think we all agree. Some other questions here?
Yeah,
Josh, you have something else?
I do. One thing that I definitely was hoping to clarify, because as I read it, I didn't fully understand it. It's just related to recommendation 10, which I think is on page 35. And it talks about emphasize to. I wasn't sure what that meant.
Let me get there. I'm sorry. Hold on. My computer just glitched. Can you show that on the screen? I'm having. Oh, wait. See if I can get there.
And then I've got sort of a related question after that too.
Okay, recommendation. You're talking about the de-escalation?
Yeah, wait, the next sentence, it says this language should be emphasized to. And I didn't know what emphasize, does that mean change to or emphasize to?
It should be changed to provide that emphasis to de-escalation should be employed in all situations where it would not jeopardize the safety of another person or the escape of the suspect. Also produce a barrier. So these are recommendations to change your verbiage to emphasize these aspects of de-escalation. So yes, we could use the word change to, and that would maybe have been a little bit clearer.
Okay, and the other thing, so one of the things there's the shall should language, and I think on page 33, you kind of in discussing the de-escalation, talk about how it's the best practice to have that shall language related to de-escalation. And sort of how that fits both with this recommendation, but in several places, like we have, and I don't know if it's this recommendation, the when objectively reasonable, you're trying to give more context to. We also have shall consider language rather than shall de-escalate. It's sort of shall consider de-escalation, and I wondered how all of that fit together.
Maurice, would you like to handle this one?
Sure. I think what we're trying to prioritize here is that we want. We've noted this in talking to the city. There's some, language that is currently used reflects Iowa state law. We're encouraging sort of some adoption of national best practices around encouraging the prioritization of de-escalation rather than it just being something that is something that should be in the toolbox. It should be something that should be prioritized. And I think this is something that we've seen across the country. And while it can be a tool in the toolbox, we think in terms of best practices for department, we want to prioritize the shall language so that officers in the field know that their number one go-to tactic should be around de-escalation. And that's, again, and Taz, I'm not sure if you want to add anything about reflecting national best practice, but that's kind of one of the things that we encourage at 21CP is doing that piece.
Yes, and we see this across the country, and oftentimes, a lot of our work has been in consent decree as well, areas such as Baltimore, Cleveland, and Seattle. And officers will sometimes resist saying, well, wait a second, the law is Garrity, and that deals with what is use of force and when can you use force and so forth. We understand that. We agree with that. That's not what we're trying to say is best practices. Best practices oftentimes will go above and beyond what just the primary basis of the law is. That is our recommendation, that the department strives for best practices in these areas. By law, it may not be obligated to go there, and there is, quite a few specific laws to deal with use of force and what levels are required and so forth. But we encourage the department to go above and beyond what just the basis of law is, to go with what best practice is that is emerging across the country. Does that make more sense?
That does. And so the goal is, in a situation where it's possible to de-escalate, that the policy should be to de-escalate, or they shall de-escalate when you can.
Absolutely. That's just a very nice, simple way of putting it. When you can de-escalate, do so. And there's going to be times when you can't. But de-escalation then runs through the whole gamut of the contact, because you may have to use force, but as soon as you recognize the force is being effective, tone down the force. That's also de-escalation. You may have to start off with a strike, but you don't continue with strikes once the individual has become compliant. You tone it down, you bring it back down to just holds or handcuffing or different things to control the individual, but not necessarily overcome active aggression. And so it is a continual sliding scope of how you apply force, with the goal being applying the minimal or no force if at all possible. Sometimes that's not possible, but a lot of times it is if you're given the right tools and training to accomplish that.
Scott, do you want to address, as we have issued this now and it's available to the public, what are we going to do as follow-ups, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects. You'll recall at the beginning I mentioned that we will give a frequent report quarterly on the progress of these recommendations. The consultants have indicated that they would be available for additional conversations with council. If that's a desire, you can funnel that through me, through the city manager's office. And really at this point then there's aspects of each of these recommendations that involve additional public input as well. And so many of these are already in progress. And so we are not going to wait to continue that improvement as what we saw in the report. But there will be additional public input and updates frequently.
Will we tie that with Public Works then? I mean, the quarterly.
We'll do it at the same time. We'll coordinate the progress in that report at the same time we do this one.
Any other questions? Chris?
Just a quick comment. I wasn't here when you started all this. I was
taking time off.
I was taking. I was in the cheap seats when you guys were in a very difficult situation, and I applaud you all. A couple of takeaways. I do think, and somebody said this before, that this is as much about the city organization and the council and our funding priorities as much as it is the police. And for that reason, I wish the title of the report was different. This is not about the police, and we could tell Dana, go do all of these things today, and he can't do most of them unless this council does things differently. And that's a really important piece of this, that it's not isolated to one department. The other thing that I would just say is, it's amazing to me in just the summary recommendations, how much of them include the words, continue to do this, or emphasize this, all illustrations in the language that they're things we're doing already, but maybe we could improve them 10 or 20%. And that's a real compliment to the leadership of our police department. And the last thing that I'd say, because I think you all have pulled this off really well, I hold our police department up high for subjecting themselves to this. I know they were asked by you all to do that. But just think for a minute, if the rest of the 6 of us all hired an outfit to come in and interview all the people that we work with and work for, and write a 75-page on all the little things that we can improve in our job. It's nerve-wracking, and I hope that we take this model and do it to other departments, to the city manager, to others, and bring a third party in to look at this. And I think you'll find out that the way in which Des Moines police have operated through this has been remarkable and transparent, and they're they're searching for good things. And I just compliment the chief for leading the department through this, because going through a peer review or an outsider's review is the single hardest thing to do in a professional job. And I think it's really impressive that this has happened, and that the results are really pretty positive about the things that we can do to improve that aren't that hard, and all the good things that we're doing already.
Well, and to that, I want to thank the community and for pressing, but also to this council for listening to the community and us responding. And Scott, to you as well. Let's keep up the work. This has to move forward, and we need to get some more definitive answers on how we're going to move forward and how quickly. But thank you. Anybody have anything else? All right, Scott,
I think Jeff
any
has-
follow-up, any
Jeff
closing
has
remarks? All right, I think,
I would just like to thank you and thank the city of Des Moines for the opportunity to work with you. The last gentleman there brought up some significant points. I think the fact that the city and the department are both involved and indicated in this report of ways to resolve this, and the fact that you opened up your doors, allowed us to come in, because we know it is a hassle, it is an intrusion, it takes time away to do other things, but it shows a willingness and a desire to improve and to do better, and we applaud you for that. And as we said at the beginning of this report, we found an agency that is operating pretty well, and like any agency can improve, and based on the fact that you invited us in here to do this shows your willingness and desire to improve. And so we recommend you just continue down that path. And thank you again for allowing us to come in.
all right, thank you, everybody. And I've been reminded that we have a 3 o'clock closed session, so council, we'll see you back here. Our regular meeting will start at 4:45 with some proclamations. And then I think that we're going to try to swear somebody in and get them to commit to being here to our city council. So with that, thank you all for attending. And for those that want, either online or in person, we'll be here at 4:45. This meeting's adjourned.